and how you govern and guide all things through history. Move us to find great comfort and joy in the fact that you're watching over us, you're taking care of us. No matter whatever was in front of us, we can rejoice knowing that we're in your care. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. All right, so nearly all the book is under our belt. 2 more chapters that we have to walk through. Today, we are going to start off with chapter 9, but we're going to start off first with this introduction question. I might have asked one similar as I was writing it out. I think I might have asked a question like this before, but then I thought, even if I did, it's over a week ago, so it's totally fine. God has promised to work things out for the good of his people. Are there times in your life when his providence was more visible than others? What impact does this have on your life? You can discuss amongst yourselves or with yourself if your Deb's up here in the corner. Or you can do it with everybody, that's fine too. Are you wanting to talk to yourself? Please converse with your table. No, just go ahead.
I would have to say that though it looked really, really bleak when we had our car accident in 1991 when Adrian was just 6 years old. She was unconscious for 4 days in Phoenix Children's Hospital for 12 days. It really did not look very good. And they said that she had a traumatic brain injury, and to this day she has some challenges. I don't ask her to make a quick decision does she want chicken tonight for dinner or does she want beef tonight for dinner. I don't ask her to make snap decisions, but both she and I think that the good Lord has given her a gift in that she knows pain and she can feel people's pain, and she now has the gift of giving massage to people and helping people. To both of us, it's very amazing that she has this gift.
Sure. Yeah. June, were you going to say something? I thought maybe you were raising your hand too. If you're not, it's okay. I just saw it out of the corner of my eye. That's a no, and that's okay. That's all right. It's totally fine. I actually was going to ask you if you thought this was a trick question, only because of when his providence is more visible than others. Almost as if to say, he is watching over us sometimes and not other times, but that's not true. Maybe a better way to phrase it is when his providence makes more sense than others.
I think his providence is always there. We don't always see it.
Of course it is. 100%. It always is. And that's what I was getting at, is that he is always taking care of us. Sometimes the things that we have to go through or go over or go around, we might question or wonder, but it's not like he's not there. He certainly is there. He's certainly watching over us. He's promised us that he is. And he's told us that, right? Ruling all things for the benefit of the church, his people. So, we would say that impacts our lives in a significant way, right? When we understand and recognize that the things that are in front of us, God is using for our good, then it makes us more willing to say, all right, I'm gonna push forward with this. Doesn't mean it's gonna be easy. Doesn't mean we don't have to have those moments where this is not great. But it does then refocus us and say, the Lord's with me, he loves me, he's taking care of me, I can get through this. Right? That's tremendous, and that's important for us to be reminded of on occasion. All right. I don't know if there's any other questions on that, but otherwise we're going to jump into this chapter 9 business. All right. So, make sure I'm in the right. The Jews destroy their enemy. Now, in the 12th month, which is the month of Adar, and I just now realized I'm reading out of ESV, so if you're reading out of NIV or EHV, it's going to be a little different. I just have it in front of me, and that's what I'm going to read. So, now the 12th month which is the month of Adar, on the 13th day of the same, when the king's command and edict were about to be carried out, on the very day when the enemies of the Jews hoped to gain the mastery over them, the reverse occurred. The Jews gained mastery over those who hated them. The Jews gathered in their cities throughout all the provinces of the king of Ashurus to lay hands on which is Xerxes, to lay hands on those who sought their harm. And no one could stand against them, for the fear of them had fallen on all people. All the officials of the province and the satraps and the governors and the royal agents also helped the Jews, for the fear of Mordecai had fallen on them. For Mordecai was great in the king's house, and his fame spread throughout all the provinces. For the man Mordecai grew more and more powerful. The Jews struck all their enemies with the sword, killing and destroying them, and did as they pleased to those who hated them. In Susa, the citadel itself, the Jews killed and destroyed 500 men, and also killed Parashadath, and Daphlon, and Aspath, and Porathath, and Adlah, and Ardiath, and Parmashtath, and Arsai, and Ardai, and Vazarath, the 10 sons of Haman, the son of Hamadatha, the enemy of the Jews. But they laid no hand on the plunder. That very day the number of those killed in Susa, the citadel, was reported to the king. And the king said to Queen Esther, "In Susa, the citadel, the Jews have killed and destroyed 500 men, and also the 10 sons of Haman. What then have they done in the rest of the king's province? Now what is your wish? It shall be granted you. And what further is your request? It shall be fulfilled." And Esther said, "If it please the king, let the Jews who are in Susa be allowed tomorrow also to do according to this day's edict. And let 10 sons of Haman be hanged on the gallows." So the king commanded this to be done. A decree was issued in Susa, and the 10 sons of Haman were hanged. The Jews who were in Susa gathered also on the 14th day of the month of Adar, and they killed 300 men in Susa, but they laid no hand on the plunder. Now the rest of the Jews who were in the king's province also gathered to defend their lives, and got relief from their enemies, and killed 75,000 of those who hated them. But they laid no hand on the plunder. This was on the 13th day of the month of Adar, and on the 14th day they rested and made that day of feasting and gladness. All right, so there's the section that we have before us. List 3 things. And I'm just going to give you we'll give you 2 minutes, not even, to think about 3 things that just jumped out at you. You can discuss it with your table, and then what we'll do is we'll maybe talk about a couple of those things, and then we'll move on to the next question. But think about that whole section, and then the 3 things that kind of just stood out to you as we were reading it. Go for it.
What was the day that they supposedly killed? Is this the same day?
Great. That's true. Yeah.
Well, I want to.
The king was letting them all do this.
Yeah, because they killed them and then they had them hanged. Was that the chronological order? Yeah, it was an important.
That was only all in one day, right?
So I don't understand.
You have your 3 things, Steph?
I do. I'm going to look back.
It doesn't take much. It's kind of like a shopping repeat.
Yeah.
Everybody got them? What do you think? 3 things jump out at you when you read that section.
Well, that was So was that the day? I'm looking back. Is that the day they were supposed to be killed?
Yeah, that was the day that they were supposed to. Haman, remember, he cast lots, and we're going to read that a little bit as we move down. Cast lots for a specific day when he would go about, kill, annihilate, exterminate, whatever you want to say, all the Jews. And that's the day that it fell on. And then remember, Queen Esther had through the banquet one day and then came back through a banquet the next day. And her request was that Haman be killed, and then that they would be able to send an edict out themselves, right, that would allow the Jews to defend themselves on that day. And that's what you see here. You see that the Jews are defending themselves on that day, and that took place months in advance, right? So if we were looking at a time gap between chapter 8 and chapter 9, we would say it's about 6 months, right? So they had enough time for the Jews to hear the edict, to go out, to get ready, to maybe purchase swords, to train with swords, so that they were ready on this day to defend themselves, because that's what Mordecai had. That's what Mordecai wrote and sent out to all of the kingdom after Haman was killed, right? Remember, King Xerxes was like, "Oh, Mordecai, you write up something and I'll stamp my name on it. You have my signet ring. You write whatever you think is good," and that's what he wrote. He said, "We want it so that the Jews can defend themselves. They can essentially kill anybody who attacks them on this day." And so that's what this is. That's what's happening here. And formally would be the where is that? 13th. I was going to say it's the 13th day. I get a little confused on the days because the 14th day actually is the second day in which Esther says, but we want one more day. Can we have another day to do this? Just in the city of Susa. So when the Jews celebrate Purim, I believe it's on the 14th and 15th. And we'll talk about that as we move forward, because those are the days of rest and rejoicing after that day is over, right? So for all of the kingdom outside of Susa, the 14th was the first day of rejoicing. And then for those in Susa, the day of the 15th would be a day of rejoicing, because that's the day after they hanged Haman's sons and they killed the 300 extra people. Does that make sense? All that makes sense? Okay. And we talked about it, remember, maybe we didn't talk too much about it, but remember the rules of the Medes and the Persians are not something that can be broken, right? So you get Daniel in the lion's den. The king regrettably sends Daniel into the lion's den because there was a decree from the king that if this were to take place, this would happen. And so it's not like the king is saying, well, this event that I decreed earlier isn't going to take place. He just essentially said now the Jews can defend themselves when this event does take place. And there was an encouragement for them to do so. And as we read last week, and you get it from the beginning of this section too, it seems like the people that were around the Jews, what do? They rallied behind them, right? The people rallied behind them. And we'll talk maybe more about that later. But does that make sense? Any more questions that you have? Okay, go ahead, Debs.
I thought it was remarkable that not only did they kill the 10 sons, but then they hung them.
Yeah.
Public display.
Yeah. And I know we had talked about that last week. Some said put on a pole or hung. It's really just put up. I mean, that's kind of what, so probably hung. That's what most people translate, but it could have been on a stake. Anybody else?
The number of people that are listed.
How many people altogether?
Were killed.
How many people altogether do we have? We've got 75,800.
Yeah.
Right? Actually, some people suggest that that number is so large that that's what makes this book fake. Like, this isn't a real thing because of that. But if you think about a kingdom that's spread from, it goes all the way over to the Mediterranean Sea, all the way over into India. I mean, that's a huge kingdom. 75,000 people. Don't take this wrong, isn't a lot. I mean, it is a lot. It is a whole lot, but it's not necessarily a whole lot. In fact, some would suggest that if they were to actually exterminate all the Jews like Haman's original request, there would actually have been more death. Yeah. Anybody else? Any other thing? If not, it's okay. We can jump to the questions.
Well, also the fact they took no plunder.
Excellent. Good observation, because I think that we're going to look at that and we're going to talk about that, because to me that's an important detail that is really good for us just to think about. And we will think about it. We're going to think about it right now, and then we're going to keep thinking about it, because I have some questions regarding that. So, the fateful day of the 13th day of the 12th month, the month of Adar, arrived, what led many officials of the empire to aid and assist the Jews in their combat to those who hated them. So what led many officials of the empire to aid and assist the Jews in their combat with those who hated them?
They were scared of the Jews now.
Scared of the Jews? What else?
They had God on their side. They knew they had God, a different God than what they had.
Yeah, I think it's very safe to say, you can say that they were afraid of the Jews. I think that comes from some of the conversations we've had before. But remember, what does Haman's wife tell Haman? If this Mordecai that you're going against is a Jew, you're not going to overcome him. He's going to overcome you. Right? This notion that the Jews have a God behind them that cares for them is, I think, even seen amongst not just the Jews, but also those around them. And so I think you get a little bit of that here. Also, I think the officials, you could maybe have a much more worldly thought. Mordecai's in power. What does he have on his finger? Last time we saw King Xerxes took his signet ring off of Haman and put it on Mordecai. Mordecai's second in command. So in this regard, I think there's also a fear of the notion of like, well, Mordecai really harbors now the power of Xerxes. And so to go against him would maybe not be a wise choice. So I think you've got some of that like flip-flopping. I mean, there might have been people who are like, yeah, we're all for Haman. Well, now Haman's going, no, we're all for Mordecai, type of a thing. Just because power.
It's not any different today.
No, it's not. It absolutely isn't, because this is a real story, right? These are real people that we're talking about. And so you can see parallels between them and us, or them and nowadays, right? So I think that's part of the reason why you get this notion of, right there, right? For all the officials in the provinces and the satraps and the governors and the royal agents also helped the Jews, for the fear of Mordecai had fallen on them, right? I think the notion is that this Mordecai now he's in power. So he's the new official. We kind of got to do what he says. Otherwise, we ourselves might be in a difficult spot. I mean, look at his first decree. His first decree in his position of power is issued out that the Jews would be able to kill anybody who come after them. So if we stand against these Jews, what does that automatically mean? It means we're against Mordecai, which means we're against Xerxes, because Xerxes put his ring on it or signed his name to it, right? All right. Now, how do you think this event impacted King Xerxes and his relationship with Esther?
I don't know if it made any difference.
Yeah.
We just it's very clear that as we've walked through this book, realistically, the first 8 chapters, Xerxes is kind of made on the scene, and now he's kind of he's kind of a secondary character, it almost feels like. It's really more about Esther and Mordecai. Where at the very beginning, what was it really about? Really more about Xerxes. Xerxes is all this. And then you'll get at the very end, chapter 10, which is very short, but it's all about Xerxes and Mordecai. But I think it's just kind of an interesting thing. And then you at least I kind of found it interesting. What does Xerxes do after this day, or on this day, the very end of the day? Where's it at? I think it's up here. All right.
Show you pictures.
He goes to Esther, and he talks to her and he says, "What do you need?" Right?
Yeah.
What's your wish? It shall be granted to you. And what further is your request? It shall be fulfilled. Notice what's not there this time. That it was last time when he asked her
Up
about.
to half of the kingdom.
Yeah, that phrase is not included anymore. I don't know why, but it's just not there. Whereas it was there, the multiple times he said it earlier on. Esther, what's your wish? Up to half the kingdom, it's yours. Well, come to my banquet. The next day, Esther, what's your wish? Up to half my kingdom, it's yours. Tell me, what is this thing? Now, after this has all been fulfilled, what's your request? It'll be granted to you.
She got the whole kingdom.
Maybe now it's even more than that. I don't know. I just think in this regard, there does seem to be, in my mind as I read it, and obviously this is all in my mind because there's no tone or inflection that is put into it, but it's almost like there's a different demeanor between the two of them as I read it, and that's just me. I don't know. That might not really be anything, but as I read it, it's almost like it seems to be. I don't know. I don't really know. It's such a different thing, and that might actually be because there hasn't been wine involved in this situation. You know what I mean? Like it really might be that. You know, I don't know. Were you gonna say something back there?
I just said she already had half of the kingdom, so.
In this regard, we really can't say. I mean, you can't say too much about it. I know we did have that question about whether or not Esther or Mordecai is mentioned in the history books.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
And I did do some digging on that, and there isn't actually. Some speculate that there is Herodotus does talk about Xerxes, and he talks about one of Xerxes' wives, Amistar, and many think that's Esther. I mean, it's close, right? If you don't have Am and Estar, so it's very possible that is Esther, but it doesn't actually call her Esther. And Mordecai isn't really mentioned either, unless you take him to be a guy named Marduk. So it's not like a straight out, and the event of this type of stuff we don't really have in the history books, so to speak. Doesn't mean it didn't happen. It's just in this regard there isn't that mention any of these people by name. And I think part of this, as you read through the Book of Esther, even with this instance, what kind of light does it put on King Xerxes? If I read something about a king who made an edict foolishly to his best buddy and didn't know that it was going to impact his wife, and then she comes and pleads for him, and then he ends up killing his best buddy so that he can undo this justice, and then a high official loses 10 of his sons because of it, I don't know if that's something I would include in the history books if I was that king. Because it just doesn't paint him in the best of light. And I can't say that's why I thought it. It's obviously speculation. But in this regard, we would say, obviously the celebration of Purim is something that the Jews celebrate to this day. I think this year it's March 14th, and we'll talk about that because there was a question about the lunar calendar, and I've got some stuff on that too. So the notion of this being, I don't know what you'd say, cemented in historical documents, we would say yes, it's in the Bible, which is a historical document. If you're looking outside of that, extra biblical documents, we would say there seems to be some glimpses of it. It doesn't ever speak against it. It would actually fit well with what we have from Herodotus, but there's not like a specific Esther mentioned by name or Mordecai mentioned by name. I don't know if there's any questions on that, but all right. As you look through this section, how might we respond to the notion that the Jews were cruel and unjust in the way they carried this out? I mean, you read it, I feel like that might be one of the first things that you kind of just like, whoa! And part of that's the number, right? 75,000 people? And then 500, and then the request of Esther is what? Can we have another day? And then another 300? Look through it, you think to yourself, how might we respond to the notion that this was cruel and unjust, carried out by the Jews?
It seems like there's way more Jews than you ever think of. I always think of them as such a small nation.
Remember,
I don't know if that's-
when they come out of Egypt, how big are they?
Oh, they're like 1 million.
We guess
2
2.
million?
600 fighting men is what Exodus said. Now, obviously, you're guessing on some of that, right? If you've got 600 fighting men, you're guessing that maybe there's a woman for each man. And if there's a woman for each man, maybe there's at least one child. But you take 600,000 times 3, you get yourself up to close to 2 million pretty quickly. And you think about that as they're crossing the Red Sea, as they're in the wilderness. I mean, like, that's huge.
And they had bigger families.
Right. So I think the notion of one kid is, in my mind, a safe assumption. Right? So, I mean, and I also think in that sense, too, I think it's fair to say that their numbers must have been large in Egypt. And this is obviously a different time. But their numbers must have been large in Egypt because what was the Pharaoh's concern? These people rightfully could take over us. Like, that's a legitimate concern that we have. Now, obviously, they've been through the wilderness and a full generation dies off, right? And then they make it to the Promised Land. And then the Promised Land is prosperous after things get settled down underneath King David. And then you get all this nonsense, which is a lot of stuff, and then they get exiled. But if you take, let's just say, I mean, I think it's safe to say that their number is I would say it's got to be over 1 million. And that's just my thinking about it. I would say they're over 1 million by the time they're being exported or whatever. That means you've got Jews spread all over. So 75,000 compared to if it is 1 million seems like a relatively small number. But yeah, I don't think we would. I think the notion of we always think about. I think the reason we think that it's such a small group is because a small group is what gets sent back. You got a small remnant of what was actually there that does come back, and God actually gives the Promised Land too, and then they kind of start over, so to speak. But go for it.
With regard to cruel and unjust, I don't think so, because it says they gathered and defended themselves, getting relief from their enemies. They killed 75,000 of those who hated them. They weren't just willy-nilly killing people.
Yeah, I would say the text seems to almost seems to really kind of help people understand that this isn't like a vendetta that the Jews are carrying out against people. It
And
says,
further, they did not take the plunder.
Being attacked, that number.
right.
That's the way I look at it.
And in that regard too, I think that's another thing. Jason said it earlier, but right. There's no plunder. They're not taking the plunder. It actually says that they don't. So in this regard, we would say there can't be the claim or the accusation of what? They were doing this for their own gain.
Right.
So in this regard, we would say, no, that doesn't seem to be really the case. What it really seems to be the case is that, if anything, we would say probably people who are in line with Haman, still around, still wanting to maybe actually either not a fan of the Jews or actually want to line their own pockets by killing somebody. Because that was the decree. You can plunder their stuff. And so in this regard, I would say the only thing that I think you'd have a leg to stand on is the fact that Esther says, can we do it tomorrow? That would be the only one where you'd say, but I think in this sense, that request is not just, can we go about killing more people? I think it's, can we make a demonstration that you, King Xerxes, are also for the notion that the Jews should not be exterminated. Because what are they doing? They're making a public display by hanging Haman's 10 sons. And so I think in that regard, there is this little bit of a notion of saying, like, yeah, there are probably people who just hated them and wanted to kill them. The idea that those people are still out there, which is probably the case, Esther says, can we have another day to defend ourselves? However that works. But that was the decree. Which I think leads to this question, which I think a lot of times people do have a question like this, or at least I've heard people say it. And this is maybe a more broad and general, and discuss with your table. Let's discuss with our tables first and then come back to this. I'm going to give you like a couple minutes. But discuss with your table how this account might cause some people to claim that God is a vengeful God, full of anger. How might you respond? I mean, how many people died on that day? A lot of people. In fact, there's a lot of people who look to the Old Testament and see what God calls his people to do, and they say that doesn't seem right to us. That seems like just a jealous guy, an angry guy, not really a God. I mean, I'm obviously quoting things that I've heard. So my question is for you, how would you respond to that claim? Because it's one that I think is made often. So you discuss that at your tables. I'm going to get some more water and use the restroom. I'll be back.
Good and evil. Justice.
Did I say good
And I
people?
think just try to weasel our way out of everything. Maybe you're guilty of little things, yeah, but I did
Yeah.
to or no, I didn't. You just lie your way out. No, they did.
This isn't this account.
Where? If you look at that, we deserve it.
Deserve the anger. So they're really agreeing
But I
that
do
God
know why this.
can be vengeful and full of anger because it's his right. It's his right. But on this particular account, again, I go back to the fact that they were defending themselves. There was an edict to kill them, and they were defending themselves. So this is not anger or vengefulness. This is a defense. To me, it's a different thing than just you're not just going out looking at you're going out trying. So, and then the account 500 years before that, Saul was supposed to kill all these people. That's more about this man. Although I don't think they were supposed to kill them then either. But they were supposed to kill all the Amalekites and they didn't. And I don't think they were supposed to plunder them either.
A lot of times God had told them not to when they left Egypt, they were able to.
Yeah, take. When people were giving them things, get out of here.
Just to
Take our stuff.
you know.
What do you think? How'd you respond?
He's a just God.
He's a just God, which means what? I mean, I'm not disagreeing with you, but I would say if like you said that to me, my response would be, what does that mean?
He's got the right. He has the rights to be vengeful and angry if he wants to,
Why?
because he's God.
That's not a bad answer.
He demands perfection, and we like to weasel our way out of things when we don't even consider that. You know, I have all these excuses for why this happens, but it's harder when we were just talking about different times in the Old Testament when he said to destroy the whole nation and kill them, and like with Egypt, then they were given the plunder on the way out, and just different situations that way.
So I think, yeah, but this particular account doesn't make me think of
No,
vengeful and
I-
anger. This is defending themselves.
Right, I would agree with you. I just saw it as an avenue to ask this question. Because I think even though if you read it, I think the text itself would say that's not what we have here. I would say though, people love to ask this question. I've heard it many times from people. And so they would look at any type of the Jews killing tons of people as a, really? That doesn't seem like the work of a all-loving God. Anybody else respond to that?
We were kind of talking about how God will only tolerate so much evil in the world, and then as a punishment, we think of the flood even, there was so much evil and brought justice to it.
Yeah, I think the best place to go is is where you guys went, is rightfully to say, who are we talking about here? Are we talking about two guys? Level playing field? Are we talking about creator versus creature? I mean, God actually has the right to do whatever he wants.
And says, vengeance is mine, saith the Lord.
Right. He could do whatever he wants. He could say our job, our task for our entire life is to walk upside down. And you know what you have to do? You have to walk upside down. Now, obviously, that's kind of ridiculous and silly, but if God said that, that's what we should do. And in this regard, I would also say this. If God is who he claims to be, which is an all-powerful, all-knowing, almighty God, is it possible that the eliminating or taking out of people for a long term could be good? I mean, we look at the short circumstance and say, that can't be good. But in all actuality, how do you actually know that? You don't. You just make a judgment based upon from where you are and what you know. Point in case, why was Saul deposed?
Because he didn't kill all the people.
He didn't do exactly what he was asked by the Lord. Right? Some suggest that this might be why, in this account, why they don't take the plunder. Because when they were leaving, also when they were destroying other people, what did God say? Sometimes don't take any plunder.
And then other times he said to do it.
Right. And so in this regard, the Jews don't take any plunder. Which I think, really honestly, I think more than anything helps us understand in this instance, in this case, this isn't we're going out this for personal gain. We are defending ourselves. We don't want your stuff. Which I think, in any case or purpose, I think that's just, in my mind, that's a wise, I don't know how that took place. I don't know if word spread like we're not taking the plunder. Like I don't know how that happened, but I think to myself, I think that's a really important thing, because it does place back upon the Jews that this is not something out for personal gain. This is them defending themselves. That's it. It's not like, well, we could go kill these people and take their things, which was what the decree was from Haman. I don't like these people. Let's kill and take their things, which is totally a different decree, right? All right, now we're going to read the rest of chapter 9. Talk about Purim. All right, but the Jews who were in Susa gathered on the 13th day and on the 14th day and rested on the 15th day. Excuse me, I messed that up. But the Jews who were in Susa gathered on the 13th day and on the 14th day and rested on the 15th day, making that a day of feasting and gladness. Therefore, the Jews of the villages who lived in the rural towns hold the 14th day of the month of Adar as a day of gladness and feasting, as a holiday, and as a day on which they send gifts of food to one another. The feast of Purim inaugurated. And Mordecai recorded these things and sent letters to all the Jews who were in all the provinces of King Ahasuerus, both near and far. Obliging them to keep the 14th day of the month Adar and also the 15th day of the same year by year, as the days on which the Jews got relief from their enemies, and as the month that had been turned for them from sorrow into gladness, and from mourning into a holiday, that they should make them days of feasting and gladness, days for sending gifts of food to one another and gifts to the poor. So the Jews accepted what they had started to do, and what Mordecai had written to them. For Haman the Agagite, the son of Hammedatha, the enemy of all the Jews, had plotted against the Jews to destroy them. And he cast lots, to crush and destroy them. But when it came before the king, he gave orders in writing that his evil plan that he had devised against the Jews should return on his own head, and that he and his sons should be hanged on the gallows. Therefore, they called these days Purim, after the term pur, which is the lot. Right? Therefore, because of all that was written in this letter and of what they had faced in this matter and what had happened to them, the Jews firmly obligated themselves and their offspring and all who joined them, that without fail they would keep these 2 days according to what was written and at the time appointed each year. That these days should be remembered and kept throughout every generation and every clan, province, and city, and that these days of Purim should never fall in disuse among the Jews, nor should the commemoration of these days cease among their descendants. The Queen Esther, the daughter of Abihail, and Mordecai the Jew gave full written authority confirming this second letter about Purim. Letters were sent to all the Jews, to the 127 provinces of King Ahasuerus, in words of peace and truth, that these days of Purim should be observed at their appointed seasons, as Mordecai the Jew and Queen Esther obligated them, and as they had obligated themselves and their offspring with regard to their fasts and their lamenting. The command of Esther confirmed these practices of Purim, and it was recorded in writing. So there's the rest of chapter 9. So what is Purim?
Commemoration of the casting of the lots.
It is the days, the 14th and 15th days of the month of Adar, right, where they celebrate the notion that lots were cast. Essentially, Haman cast the lots to have them killed, and yet it was flipped on its head, and the king said, "Nope, you guys can now defend yourself." And God delivered them from their enemies. Right. So Purim is a celebration of joy and gladness. In fact, if you read stuff from Jews, Adar is a month, supposed to be like a month of joy and gladness. Which you kind of get from this notion, because it says a month that was supposed to be that of sorrow, was their sentence to death, is now the day that they rejoice because they have been liberated and there's freedom there. Why might the festival of Purim cause some to suggest that Esther should not be in the Bible? Because that is an argument, and I think after thinking about it, maybe we'll come to it, but maybe not. I don't know.
It's a blessing of what, I don't know, what happened to them and not to a God.
Okay. I have some calendars that maybe will help us understand maybe why. So here's the lunar calendar, the one that the Jews follow. So you've got 12 months. Their calendar follows a 12-month calendar, and then they have 7 years out of a 19-year cycle that they actually add a month in, because every other month is either 29 or 30 days. So their months relative to ours stay about the same, but eventually they kind of shift pretty far. That's why Easter sometimes varies about a month, right? Last year we had Easter, when did we have it? In March, the very last day of March, right? And now, this coming year, guess where it is? It's in the middle of April. Right? That's because we were kind of at the end of that cycle, right? So what they do to make up for that is they add a first Adar right here before Adar. So this month is actually Adar or second Adar, depending on if it's one of the longer cycled years. Yes?
Is this their religious calendar, or is it the way they live? I mean, do they do business according to this? And
so you can find it both ways. So like some people actually, this is how they live. In fact, you can go and you can search it up, Jewish calendar, and it'll pop it up. I think today is, what is today? Today is the 22nd of January, so it's got to be close to, I think we are, Shabbat.
Down at the bottom.
Yeah, we're down here. Thank you. And I think we're still in Tava. They call it B. Sometimes sounds like V because it's a bait, but it only makes a hard B sound when there's a dagish in it. So When I see it, I say Tevet. I think we're still technically, we might actually be in Shabbat, which is to me is kind of goofy because that also
I'm
Shabbat is a
amazed.
day.
I'm amazed at the season, they haven't listed citrus fruit harvest. We're harvesting citrus in our greenhouse.
Sure.
I mean, so were the seasons of the seasons of the trees, was it somewhat correlated?
So our month starts like right here, right? So their year begins up there in Nisan, and that's the first month, and that's when they celebrate Passover. So like
So it's
our
not that
spring
big.
is the very beginning of their year.
So in January is not,
Yeah, January is right here. You see it,
sure.
right? So it's kind of so it's off kilter a little bit, but those are the months. And the reason why I would say some people look at Esther and say, maybe it shouldn't be in there, and even Jews, is because of this column over here. The festivals that, depending on which Jew you talk to, they might say like, well, we only want to follow the festivals that are actually in the Old Testament that were given at the Mount, like given to the Jews underneath like Leviticus and stuff like that as they're leaving Egypt or leaving Exodus. Those are the festivals that we're going to celebrate. You do have a couple of other festivals that they do celebrate now. You probably know this is a different look at it, but here you go. Here's their first. This is the first of theirs. They celebrate Passover, and then you've got things like this, which would be like the Feast of Weeks, which I think you have a better view of that over here maybe. Does it say it? Passover, unleavened bread, first fruits. Later Passover, there's your Feast of Weeks. You got your harvest. But as you go forward, you've got things like Hanukkah, not in the Old Testament. That comes from the apocryphal book. And then depending on whether or not you think that Esther should be in the Old Testament or not, Purim, I would say Purim, at least for me, is anchored more in what we would call maybe the canon itself as opposed to Hanukkah. That comes out of intertestamental period. But so some Jews might say, I don't think that we should celebrate Purim because it's not something that was given to the people through like a prophet or a priest.
It was a woman.
What? Mordecai. Come on, seriously, Mordecai. No, I mean that's totally fine. No problem there. But I'm just saying, like in that regard, you have the notion that when Passover takes place, who was the guy? Moses. Right? Leviticus is issued when they're in the wilderness, which is Yom Kippur, which is the Day of Atonement, or Rosh Hashanah, which is right here too. That's a huge day, right? That's where the high priest himself goes into the most holy place. So these are all festivals that are set up and issued by God and is given to the people by a prophet or a priest. And in this regard, what do you have? Not that. Not that. Go ahead.
Well, verse 32 says the command of Esther established the directions about Purim.
Okay, I'm sorry. You could say it was Esther. It really makes, in this regard, I would say it doesn't make a difference because it's not a prophet or a priest, right? All right. I don't know if there's any other questions on the lunar calendar. The full moon is always in the middle of their month, so it starts off. I don't know if it's a waxing or waning. I can't remember. But each month begins with I think it's a
New moon.
yeah no because the new moon's a big moon, right?
No.
New moon is so they have 2
No.
days. There's 2 days where you really can't technically see the moon, and that's the
New-
beginning of the month.
new moon.
Yeah. Is that a waxing or waning moon?
There's no moon.
Yeah, but
Waxing
Yeah, but it starts
is
off-
growing and
it'd be
waning.
waxing.
So
Yes.
it's waxing.
It'd be waxing.
It's waxing. Right. There's 2 days where you really can't see a moon, and then it comes off and it's waxing, and that's the
I would think that'd be very difficult. I mean, maybe because I think most of the world don't they go on a 12-month thing like America does.
So do they.
Oh,
I mean, there's just 12 months too.
but I mean, like, okay, I'm gonna sell you my olives January, blah, 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 and only it's really something else for them. And
Well, so right. So they're never a month. They're never really like a month off. Like they're never really a month behind or a month ahead of us, because in their 19-year cycle they add first Adar. So like to keep themselves on pace with everybody else, they every once in a while they will add another month into their 12-month lunar calendar. So 1 year will have 13 months, which kind of shifts their placement.
Do you think that other parts of the world went by this calendar? Or
I have
you-
no idea.
you-
I
you-
didn't look at it
You
at
haven't
all.
studied history,
No.
other history.
I haven't looked up that kind of
It's
stuff.
hard enough to have people living West River and East River. I understand this whole thing. I can't imagine having a skewered calendar.
I mean, in this regard,
Well, it's not skewed to them though.
so that's right, and I would say,
But with the rest of the world, it would be.
I would say in this regard, realistically, I would say they probably use both. They probably have it in their mind to know both. When they go out and they do business, I'm sure they're using
Yeah.
the regular calendar. But when they read their Torah, guess what they're using?
Well,
This, because all the days have
Not a
assigned
religious-
readings and stuff like that. Yeah.
religious calendar.
Right, and so I would assume that maybe even some go by this, as opposed to the other. But I think they'd always. I mean, like I don't know how you wouldn't be able to have like both, kind of both in your head, unless you're dealing specifically maybe with another Jew who you know goes by this calendar. All right. Here we are, chapter 10. King Ahasuerus imposed tax on the land and on the coastlands of the sea, and all the acts of his power and might, and the full account on the high honor of Mordecai, to which the king advanced him. Are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the king of Media and Persia? For Mordecai the Jew was second in rank to King Ahasuerus, and he was great among the Jews, and popular with the multitude of his brothers, for he sought the welfare of his people and spoke peace to all people. So as you look at this, in this regard, what do you have? What did Xerxes impose to demonstrate that his power had not suffered any ill effects from his actions on behalf of the Jews?
Taxes.
Right. Right. In this regard, it's really it's a notion of essentially saying business is going to continue as normal. We haven't really suffered anything. We're just going to keep going. And I think you get this kind of tag on the very back of the book. It is kind of also, I think, in this regard, it's what you read when you're going through Kings, right? Right. It's very familiar to someone who's reading their Bible. This is a tag that we hear often, right? Is not their works written in the book of the annals of the kings, right? So, I think in that sense, you maybe say an encouragement to say, oh yeah, maybe this does fit. All right, last but not least, do Christians today have a right to defend themselves from their spiritual enemies by force of arms, as the Jewish people did?
I say yes.
Okay. Anybody
Well,
else?
Jesus told Peter not to draw his sword.
Okay.
We can pray.
We can pray. Okay. Which I'm assuming then would be no.
I think that's yes. The prayer of a
By
righteous man is
force
powerful.
by force of arms,
Oh, force of arms.
as the Jewish people did, like have edicts
Oh, force
passed.
of arms. Yeah. Okay.
I'm not saying that what you're saying is wrong, but I'm just, is that yes or no?
Well, chapter 6 of Ephesians.
Can you spell that out for us? I mean, are you talking about like the armor of?
The armor of God.
Okay. Is that physical, like force of arms? No.
But he established governments and he told us that we're supposed to listen to it.
So I think there's some things when we think about this question that we have to understand. Okay. especially in the Old Testament, those people were living under, for a while, what?
Theocracy.
They were living under a theocracy. So God was dictating to them, this is how you are to do things. Now, even when they did, we'll say when they did break off and said we want a king, who was still beside them? God was, and he was giving them advice and other things of that nature. And he told those kings, you've got to take this land because I'm giving it to you and I will help you along the way, right? I think the difference between that time and today is that, are we still God's people? Yes, we are. But the kingdom which we belong to is, we'll say, yeah, it's a kingdom in this earth, but it's primarily one that's where? In our hearts. Like that's what we talk about. When Jesus says, your kingdom come, we're not talking about a physical earthly kingdom, right? And so in this regard, I would say no. I would say we don't have the right to pick up a sword and attack someone, which actually you have seen happen throughout history, right? There has been encouragement from people in the church to say, we are going to attack these people and we are going to kill them or convert them or do something along those lines. That was a struggle that they had during the Reformation, right? With the peasants' revolt and all that kind of stuff. Luther was the one who came forth and said, guys, we can't do this. You can't do this. And so in this regard, I would say, God calls us to love and serve him. And he has equipped us to, I would say in this regard, with the armor of God, to, if we have enemies, sure, we can maybe travel through, like, if what they're doing is bad for a country or even maybe ourselves, and we can see that this would impact our country, you could travel down those avenues, that's fine. But I don't think we're at a point where you would be like, yeah, we're going to pick up arms and we're going to have them all killed and slaughtered.
I don't say all of them, but I do think that we need to defend ourselves.
Right, so I would say in this regard, do Christians have the right to defend themselves from spiritual enemies by force of arms? And I guess I would say in this sense, this is where I think the problem is. Spiritual
That's what I was
enemies
going to say. That whatever you say,
by
that's
force of arms.
different.
Now, if someone is attacking you, I'm not saying, well,
Physically.
that's fine, just let them do it. No, that's clearly a different scenario than this. Right? If we're talking about actually defending ourselves from an attacker, I'm saying, like, I think you probably should defend yourself in upkeeping the fifth commandment, right? Your life is valuable. You should protect your life. You should protect the life of those whom God has given you to protect. This is asking about spiritual enemies, right? And I would say in this regard, you might even, as you look at this book of Esther, you might even say, like, Mordecai was looking to physically harm. And so I would say in that sense, then there's a little bit of a different nuance than what this question is asking. But if someone is just a spiritual enemy of mine, I'm not gonna go out and say, well, you need to die.
No.
Some religions do say that, though. Some religions do say that. Christianity is not one of them. Everybody good? All right, then let's pray. Gracious Father in heaven, we thank you. We thank you for your word. We thank you for watching over us. We thank you for taking care of us. Move us as we live in this world to find great comfort and care in your word and your Son, our Savior, who gives us peace with you. Move us also to find great joy and care knowing that you are working all things for our good. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. All righty. Well, I have Winter Winkle next week, and I probably will get back later Tuesday afternoon, maybe Tuesday evening. And so if it's all right, I'm going to skip next week, and we'll jump into another minor prophet. We're going to start the